Welcome to the Pursuing Points podcast, where it's all about the pursuit of credit card points and miles today so that you can travel the world free of charge tomorrow. And now, your host, Peter Foti.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the fourth ever PursuingPoints.com podcast. I am your host, as always, Peter Foti, and I am joined today by a very special guest host, my close friend, Anthony Bonagura. Anthony, how are you?
Good, PJ. How are you, buddy?
I'm doing great. So Anthony is a former world-famous podcast host over on the Not So Little Italy podcast, which I will, of course, link to in the show notes. Unfortunately, that podcast, as best we can tell, is no longer It's no longer generating new episodes, but the ones that are on there shall live on for basically until the end of time. So definitely recommend. What's that?
Hottest takes in the biz.
Hottest takes in the biz. The content between Pursuing Points and Not So Little Italy doesn't tend to overlap at all. Not So Little Italy was much more sports focused, whereas Pursuing Points is obviously a little bit more finance, but still pretty entertaining stuff. So check that out if you're up for it. Tony is a recent law school graduate. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Congratulations. You're waiting for the results of the bar, right?
We're waiting for results. Fingers crossed that it's a good result.
Fingers crossed, yeah. All of us at Pursuing Points are hoping that you passed, and hopefully someday you can start traveling the world with us a little bit more.
Using those points. I like it.
That would be awesome. So this podcast is going to be a little bit different in that on the second episode when I had Michael on, Michael is an avid traveler. He's got several rewards cards. He's into the whole points and miles thing. Whereas Tony does not tend to travel as much. And as far as I know, well, why don't we do this? Why don't you tell us what credit cards you've got in your wallet right now?
I got two basic credit cards. I got the USAA rewards credit card and the Bank of America 321, everyone's first credit card.
Okay, so the 321, that's 3%, 2%, 1% cash back on different categories, right?
Yep.
So right now, most of your spending, it sounds like, or you're generally looking towards cash back as opposed to points for travel. Is that right?
That's correct.
And so how often do you travel?
Not as much as I wanted, PJ. Maybe 5-6 times a year, flying home, maybe flying other places, but not a lot.
Sure. Okay, so that's cool. So what's going to be interesting about today's podcast is that Tony actually listened to the first one, and in the first podcast, I talked about how I was able to earn Delta Gold status for this year. And even though I did my best to try and explain how some of that worked, Tony reached out to me and said that, as someone who doesn't really understand this at all or is pretty far removed from sort of elite status and that things of that nature, there was a lot there to sort of digest, and maybe I could have done a better job in explaining it. So in this episode, I am going to explain to Tony how sort of Delta elite status works. And it's going to be very conversational, right? So just as if he and I were sitting next to one another and I was explaining it to him, is the same thing we're going to do here. So the goal is going to be that by the end of the show, if you're not familiar, or in this case, Tony, since he's not too familiar, by the end of the show, you'll both come away with a better understanding of how this all works. How does that sound?
I like how it sounds, big guy. I'm always trying to get myself educated here.
That is, that's good to hear. I'm excited. So I guess to get started, basically, what is elite status? So Tony, how often when you do fly, say 5 to 6 times a year, how often are you simply looking for like the cheapest flight, or do you tend to stick to like a specific airline?
Well, it actually ends up being both. I typically try to do the cheapest flights, which ends up being Spirit most of the time. But it's more price, definitely.
Got it. Okay. So elite status, what that allows is that when you're choosing to purchase flights, airlines will reward your loyalty with status. So let's say in your 5 to 6 flights that you took every year, you chose to only fly on either Delta or only on United or only on American, whatever the case may be. And just so people are aware, you're in Chicago, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so for you, United, or I guess maybe even Delta in some cases, but certainly United would probably be your go-to airline as like a hub in Chicago. And if you chose to continuously purchase your tickets on a single airline, you could accrue status over time, which may lead to benefits. Maybe it's first-class upgrades or free checked bags or whatever the case may be. Whereas when you're shopping simply for the lowest cost, you're generally not going to be able to earn any of those types of benefits. And as far as I know, Spirit doesn't have any sort of elite status program. Do you know if it has one?
I think they have a credit card where you get something, but I don't think it's much.
Right. So, okay. So you generally find Spirit. Typically, you're not looking for much elite status, but is it fair to say that in the future that something like that could change?
Oh yeah, definitely. I hope so. That's the game plan.
Cool. So I, for one, like I said, in the first episode, I talked about earning gold status with Delta. So while elite status at other airlines, those programs exist, the one that I'm most familiar with is Delta, and that's the one we're going to focus on today. But just know that fundamentally, these programs are all pretty similar, right? So whether it's American or United or Delta or whatever the airline may be, generally speaking, you're going to have to meet some sort of qualification gate, right? So whether it's by flying or spending money or some combination of both, you're going to have to meet a minimum set of requirements in order to qualify for that status. And I guess before we get into what those requirements are for Delta, we should just talk a little bit about some of the benefits. So when you fly, if you had your druthers, is there any like one thing that maybe you would really prefer, whether it's like a free check bag or sitting in first class or anything like that?
Well, as you know, PJ, I'm a pretty husky fellow. And for us husky folks, the spacing get a tad tight on the plane. So I think the most important thing for me would be how big the seats are and if I can choose my seat earlier or if I have to wait or if it's one of those random things.
Yeah. And so having elite status is actually going to allow you to do just that. So if you fly on Delta, for instance, as soon as you unlock the first level of elite status on Delta, which is called Silver, at that point, you're going to be eligible for unlimited complimentary first class upgrades. There are some exclusions based on where you're flying to and from, but generally speaking, so long as you're on a regular ticket, you're going to be eligible to be upgraded into first class free of charge. And you'll also have the option or the ability to be upgraded into Delta Comfort Plus. Now, the Delta Comfort Plus seats don't offer any additional width in the seats, so they're not any wider, but you do get an additional leg room, which is nice. And I tend to find that those rows of seats are generally, at least in my experience, they're not always filled up all the way. Because if you don't have status, you'd have to pay for those upgrades. And unless there's a lot of people with status, they're not going to be fully upgraded to, I guess. So in my experience, the middle seat on those tends to be vacant, which is always nice. So in that case, you can toss up that armrest and take a little bit of extra space, which is always great.
I mean, that's the dream when you fly, right? You get that nice empty middle seat, a little extra arm room for everyone.
Exactly. And then the other thing, too, is so once you've got your status now, you're going to be eligible. You mentioned like choosing your own seats. So some of the seats on the airplanes, like the exit row seats, for instance, those will offer like additional leg room and things like that, or maybe you can board a little bit earlier. And those are actually complimentary when you're booking your flight if you've got the status. So pretty much no matter how you look at it, you're going to be in a pretty good position to be able to get those better seats just by having even the lowest level of status. Now, obviously, the way that the upgrades work, if you're a silver member, chances are you're not going to get upgraded into first class all that often because, it's essentially a class hierarchy where those above you have first dibs, whereas you're kind of at the bottom. But like I said, the Delta Comfort Plus, as well as like the exit row seats, you're going to be able to get those even if you're on the lowest level of status, which, based on how often you're flying, that may be all you really need.
Yeah, just out of curiosity, PJ, I'm in Chicago, so pretty much the center of the United States. There's not really any long flights per se, unless maybe going south. Let's say my most common trip is from Chicago to New York. About how many trips am I gonna have to take to get to this a basic silver level?
That's actually a really good question. So we can we can actually figure that out. So I'm actually I'm on my computer here. I'm gonna go to a website. So I like to use there's a calculator where we can figure this out, and I'm going to talk about the qualifying parameters in a minute, but just so that we have some sort of basis here. Do you typically fly out of what is it, Midway, MDW?
No, O'Hare.
O'Hare. Do you know what the airport code is for that?
OHR.
No, we'll stick with Midway. I'm pretty sure as far as this is concerned, it's going to be. And then do you fly into JFK or LaGuardia?
Oh, dude, come on now. Always LaGuardia.
Always LaGuardia. Okay.
Always LaGuardia. JFK is a shit show. Gotta avoid it at all costs.
Let's keep the swearing to a minimum, but thank you.
I apologize.
That's fine. So if you fly from Midway to LaGuardia, you're going to earn. Well, you know what? For the sake of this discussion, let's just say that you're going to have to fly. You would have to do that trip 30 times.
In 1 year?
Yep. So let me talk a little bit about how the qualifying gates sort of work, and then we'll revisit this topic. So in order to earn status on Delta, you have to either fly a certain number of miles or fly a certain number of segments, and we'll talk about the difference in a minute, and spend a certain amount of money. So the miles are referred to as MQMs, which stands for Medallion Qualifying Mile. And an MQM is simply based on number of miles flown. So in our MDW to LaGuardia use case here, that is 725 miles flown. So you'll earn 725 MQMs for that one-way ticket. Okay? In order to get the lowest level of status on Delta, you're going to need 25,000 MQMs, right? So 25,000 divided by 725 is about 34. But in this case, because this is a shorter flight, you're actually going to be able to earn status quicker by accruing what are known as MQSs. So this is medallion qualifying segments. And a segment is basically calculated every time the plane takes off and then it lands. So if you're flying from, say, RDU to PHL to LAS, so that's North Carolina to Philly to Vegas, you're taking off and landing twice. So that's effectively 2 segments. In your case, you're taking off once and you're landing once, so it's 1 segment. So in your case, you would have to make that trip 30 times, and you'd have to spend $3,000 on Delta. So those dollars are what's known as MQDs, or medallion qualifying dollars. And this is basically the cost of the ticket minus any taxes or fees. So this is just purely the cost of the ticket. Now, if you're flying that 30 times, I would assume that the average ticket price is going to be more than $100. So in this case, spending $3,000 on Delta would probably not be that difficult, considering the fact that you're already doing it 30 times just to... And remember, this is not 30 round trips. So that's 30 one-way flights. Round trip, you earn 1,450 MQMs. So, you basically have to do 15 round trips. How does that sound?
I mean, it sounds a lot more doable than 30, that's for sure. I'd be a little scared there right off the bat.
Oh, okay. So you thought when I said 30, that was 30 round trips?
Yeah, that's my initial reaction. But yeah, now it makes more sense.
Okay. So yeah. And so the way that this works is starting January 1st, all mileage balances reset. Now with Delta, there is a rollover perk. So let's say that you earn 30,000 MQMs in 2016. When you go to start 2017, you'll have silver status and you'll start the year with 5,000 MQMs. So they roll over. Most airlines don't do that. In your case, you're going to be starting at 0, right? So January 1st, 2017, you'll be at 0 MQM, 0 MQS, and 0 MQDs. And then in the calendar year, if you're able to earn the required number of either MQMs or MQSs and spend the required amount of money, you'll earn the status for the remainder of 2017, and then you'll have it for all of 2018. So does that sound like something you might be able to try and do someday?
Yeah, it's definitely something I would look into once I start traveling more for my job. I guess my question is, so say I'm interested in doing this, it's obviously more beneficial to sign up for it as soon as possible or as soon as close to the beginning of the year as possible. Does it become a point though in the year where it's just not worth signing up and it's just you're better off just waiting for the calendar to roll over and reset because you're not going to get anything out of it?
Well, so like I said, so they do have the rollover. So if you're in between status levels, it might make sense to keep going. In your case, because the year is almost over and you don't have that much travel planned, I would probably recommend that you continue to stick with whatever the cheapest option is, just for the rest of this year. But obviously, moving forward, and obviously, and everyone's different, right? Airlines continue to devalue how much status is worth, right? So maybe the miles become worth less, or maybe you get fewer upgrades, or in the case of Delta, so the fact that you have to spend all this money is actually a relatively new requirement. So in the past, all you had to do was either fly the required number of miles or the required number of segments. And then they added in this new revenue requirement. So this Delta program is what's known as revenue based, because you have to spend this much money in order to get the status. There is an exception to that, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But because it is revenue based, I mean, these are the types of changes that they continue to make year after year, which makes it harder and harder to earn the status. And obviously that can either be a good thing or a bad thing, right? It's a good thing in the sense that it sort of thins out the herd. So when you've got fewer people on the upgrade list, you yourself have a better chance of being upgraded. And that list is going to get smaller just by sheer fact that you have to now spend all this money, right? So if you're someone who's always looking for deals, even if you only fly in Delta, if you're buying relatively cheap tickets, you may or may not hit that MQD goal at the same time that you fly the required number of miles. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense.
So do you have any questions so far?
No, I think so far it's pretty good. I asked a couple that I was a little confused about, but now it's making more sense. So let's keep moving along.
Okay. So one of the things that I want to talk about is the difference between a Sky Mile and an MQM. So one of the things that I think confuses a lot of people is that when I talk about, you have to earn 25,000 medallion qualifying miles, they say, oh, well, I saw that in the airport, Delta has a credit card which earns, say, 30,000 miles after you sign up. Does that count? And the answer is no. So a Sky Mile are miles that you earn when you spend money on Delta, okay? Or when you spend money on a Delta credit card, or you can purchase Sky Miles directly from Delta. And the earning structure is based on how much status you have. So if you have no status whatsoever, you're going to earn 5 Sky Miles per dollar that you spend on Delta. So if your flight costs $353, let's say $53 of that is taxes, you're going to earn, so effectively you've spent $300 and you're going to earn 5 Sky Miles per dollar, so you'll get 1,500 miles back. So these are the miles that you can then redeem at some point in the future for a free flight on Delta. Whereas MQMs, or medallion qualifying miles, cannot be redeemed for anything, right? These miles are simply used to track your progress towards different elite status tiers. And like I said before, they're based on how far you're flying. Generally speaking, you're going to earn 1 MQM per 1 mile flown. There's some bonuses associated with, say, flying at first class where you can earn, say, 2 MQMs per mile flown. But generally speaking, it's a 1-to-1 ratio.
Yes, I just have a quick question. Can the Sky Miles you get, say you get that free flight out of your Sky Miles, do those then count toward medallion qualifying miles, or is there something about, all right, you already cashed in on one, you can't cash in on both?
That's actually a really good question. So just so that I understand, is the question, can you earn MQMs on an award ticket, say?
Yeah, that's what what I was asking.
So that's actually a really good question. So when you fly in Delta, if you purchase an award ticket, okay, you are not eligible to earn MQMs on that ticket. If, however, you purchase a plane ticket on Delta and you use your Sky Miles as cash, you do earn MQMs. So when you use your Sky Miles as cash, what that means is if the ticket is $300 cash, you could then use 30,000 Sky Miles. So it's 1 mile is equal to 1 penny. Okay? But when you're purchasing an award ticket, that valuation will change. In some cases, you might be able to get, say 5 cents per point if you can find a really good redemption. In other cases, it may be 2 cents, 3 cents, 1 cent, whatever the case may be. But there is a distinction there. So if it's an award ticket, you will not earn any MQMs. But if you're using your Sky Miles as if they were cash, you will earn medallion qualifying miles on that flight.
All right, cool. That makes sense.
Sweet. Okay, so at this point we've talked about a little bit about Sky Miles versus MQMs, the different qualifying gates. Really, the only thing left to cover is, and I touched on this in the first episode, is how you can do a couple things. So let me back up for a quick second. Medallion qualifying miles, like I said, you can only earn through flying. Obviously, there's a little bit of an asterisk there because on certain credit cards, you can also earn MQMs. So Delta has 3 different credit cards. They're all co-branded through American Express. They've got the Delta Gold, which is a $95 a year annual fee. When you sign up, you get 30,000 bonus miles. And again, those are the Sky Miles that we talked about a minute ago. After you spend $1,000 in the first 3 months. And you also get a $50 statement credit on your first Delta purchase within 3 months. So on that card, there is no way for you to earn MQMs. That's sort of Delta's baseline card. It does come with some benefits like free check bags and things like that, but that is the lowest level card that you can have with Delta. But what's nice about it, and this applies to all of the Delta cards, is that if you spend $25,000 in a year, you become exempt from that MQD waiver that we talked about. So MQDs, real quick, are medallion qualifying dollars. So that's when you're trying to qualify for silver, you need your 25,000 MQMs or your 30 segments, and you need to spend $3,000. But if you've got one of these Delta cards that we're talking about and you spend $25,000, they have you at that point you just become exempt. So they refer to it as an MQD waiver. And the waiver kicks in once you've spent $25,000 in a calendar year on any Delta credit card. So that might be a reason to use the Delta Gold, but we're going to talk about the 2 other cards here in a minute. And honestly, if you're going to spend that much money, it would make more sense to spend it on one of the ones we're going to talk about next. But does that make sense, how that waiver works?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Cool. So the second card is the Delta Platinum Amex, and this is the one that I have. I talked about it at length in the first episode. Basically, it's a $195 annual fee. The sign-up bonus now is you get 5,000 MQMs as well as 35,000 bonus miles. So those are the MQMs, which you can typically only earn through flying. If you sign up for this card today and you spend $1,000 within the first 3 months, you're actually going to get 5,000 MQMs towards your status. Right? So for someone like you, especially who you don't fly a ton, there are ways for you to earn status without actually having to fly very much at all. And in fact, on this platinum card, because you get the 5,000 when you sign up, you also get an additional 10,000 MQMs after you spend $25,000 in a calendar year, right? So now you're at 15,000 total. And then if you spend 50,000 in a calendar year, right? So 50,000 total, you earn an additional 10,000. And in each case, you also earn 10,000 bonus miles. So effectively, if you spend $50,000 on this card, you earn the MQD waiver, right? So you don't have to worry about spending, the $3,000 on Delta. You earn 20,000 MQMs plus the 5,000 for the sign-up bonus, so you've effectively earned the lowest level of status without having flown at all. And you earn the additional 55,000 bonus miles, which, like we talked about earlier, you could put those towards award tickets, or you could use them as cash. They would be equal roughly to $550 should you choose to use them in that way. So that's the card that I have, and I have it specifically because it allows me to earn those MQMs. So even though I do fly a fair amount, I still need this extra boost in order to get me to those higher levels, which I'm not sure if we talked about those. So Delta has 4 levels of status. They've got silver, gold, platinum, and diamond. They all have just different benefits. We're not going to talk about all of those, but I will link to the full benefits breakdown in the show notes, so you can check it out if you're interested. But basically just know that for the highest level of status, which is diamond, you need 125,000 MQMs or 140 segments and $15,000 in spend. Again, obviously you can negate that with the waiver. But and then the last card is pretty similar. So it's called the Delta Reserve. It's got a $450 annual fee, and it's very similar to the Platinum in that if you spend $30,000 in a year, you get the 15,000 MQM bonus. If you spend $60,000 total, that comes along with another 15,000 bonus. So in total, if you spend $60,000, you'll get 30,000 MQMs, 30,000 bonus miles, and then the current sign-up bonus right now is 10,000 MQMs and 10,000 bonus miles. So with this card, if you sign up and you spend $60,000, you will have 40,000 MQMs, which puts you 10,000 away from gold status without having flown at all. These cards have other benefits. We're not going to talk about all of them. The biggest one for the reserve is that it comes with lounge access, which is part of the reason why the annual fee is so high. But so those are the 3 cards. That's sort of how that all works. Do you have any questions?
Yeah, I guess my only question here is when I don't know if you can answer this or not, but like when do you see like the benefits from going, say, the platinum route, or like how much do you have to spend? How many flights do you have to take a year? Like when should I start thinking about applying for these certain cards?
So that's a good question, right? So the first thing that I always tell people when we talk about like points and miles, credit cards, travel, et cetera, is that you really have to know what your goals are. So, my goals are whenever I fly, I want to be flying in first class. And generally speaking, when I go to redeem miles that I've earned, I want to use those for awards that I wouldn't otherwise consider paying for or be able to pay for, right? So if it's a $10,000 ticket, that's probably not something I'm ever going to be able to afford, or nor would I ever want to pay that much, but I can use my miles to get me there. So in your case, because you fly so infrequently, I would recommend continuing to do what you're doing now. Now, if you decide that you really value these types of status tiers, and you think that you can meet the minimum spending requirements for these cards in order to earn that status, then I would tell you to go for it. But obviously everybody's different. So like in your case, you fly in Spirit, but you may be better off just like using, say, like a Chase Sapphire Preferred or like the new Chase Sapphire Reserve and earning miles that you can then transfer to a multitude of different airlines. Because those tend to be more valuable than, in my case, even though I'm spending all this money on this card and earning all these miles, I can only ever use these on Delta. So I'm pretty much locked in at that point. Whereas if you spend money on a card like the Sapphire, you can transfer those to, say, United or Southwest or whatever the case may be. And you've just got a lot more flexibility, which is nice, especially when you travel a little more infrequently. So if we want to take a look at, what your goals are and what cards you may want to consider, we could do a whole episode about that. But I guess for now, just know that if you're going to go after status and you can meet some of these minimum spending requirements, that's great. But if not, and if you tend to not fly as much, maybe having a card with a more flexible earning structure and redemption structure would make more sense for you.
Yeah, I think that's all right. That makes sense. That's good. It's good advice. So essentially, what you're saying, just to kind of sum it up or make sure I understand, is if you can't make the pay, like if you can spend $25,000 or $50,000 a year to qualify for those MQM bonuses and this incentives that they put on the platinum card, or if you're going to fly enough that you can rack up the miles, that it's worth it that you'll go into tiers. It's worth it to do that. If not, you're better off just getting a credit card that will just give you miles in general that you can spend on a multitude of airlines. So you're not locked into one specific airline.
Yeah, well, because think about it, right? Even if you can spend the money and you say you earn silver status, if you don't fly very much, then even though you've got those benefits available to you, you're not really going to be able to take advantage of them, right? So in your case, it would be better for you to have those miles that you can do whatever you want with, and then when you're ready to use them, you could use them for a first class ticket, right? As opposed to having these benefits and then not really being able to do much with them on a regular basis. So certainly, even though you could have technically earned this status without flying a lot, it really only benefits you if you do fly a lot. So you just kind of have to figure out what your goals are and how your travel is going to look, over time.
All right, I said another quick question. When we kind of talked about the difference between Sky Miles and MQMs, do Sky Miles roll over at the end of the year, or do they just disappear as well?
So your Sky Miles never expire. So the one cool thing about Delta, and this is, there's not too many other programs that offer this, is that your Sky Miles never expire. So as long as you've got a Sky Miles account, maybe you could cancel it, but as long as you have an active account, those Sky Miles that you earn from spending money on cards or flying on Delta will never expire, and then you can choose to redeem them whenever you want.
So it might just be beneficial for someone in my situation to apply for the Sky Miles card, start racking up those miles, and then once I'm in a position where I'm going to fly a lot or being in those certain gates or qualification gates is beneficial to me, and then apply for or try to get like the other, like then apply for like the platinum credit card.
So if the Delta Gold card came with like a huge sign up bonus, then I would say yes, you should sign up for it. You should take advantage of the sign up bonus, and then you should bank those Delta miles. Right now, because the bonus offer is only 30,000 miles, that's pretty low and that's pretty typical. But what I would look for in your case is if you think that, okay, I want to fly in Delta in the future, keep an eye out for that Delta Gold card and see if it goes up. See if the bonus goes up at 50,000, 60,000, whatever it might be, and then jump on it. But one of the worst things you can do is just sign up for cards and then have these miles and then not really know what to do with them, because they tend to become devalued over time. So no, I wouldn't necessarily recommend you sign up for this card today. Like I said, if you wanted to get started, and I think we could do a whole episode about this, but the card that like I would probably recommend would either be like the Chase Sapphire Reserve, because of the incredible sign-up bonus it has right now, which you can go back to episode 2 and when I applied for that live on the show, or like say the Sapphire Preferred, which is sort of like the younger brother of the Reserve. It's got similar benefits, but it's less valuable. But that card I think has like 50,000 points as like the sign-up bonus, right? And in that case, you could transfer those to, like I said, United or Southwest or Marriott or all these different programs. So if you're looking to get started, I would definitely go more towards that route, unless you can find a better offer than the 30,000 miles that's being publicly promoted right now by Delta.
All right, cool, thanks. I think I got a pretty good grasp of it now. I think I understand.
Cool.
Well, not fully understand, but definitely a start.
It's a process. These programs are, it's certainly not rocket science, but it's also not super simple if you've never really like dove in to sort of do the research before. So that's cool. I'm glad. We're at 34 minutes, so we're gonna have to say goodbye for now. But we'll surely look to have you on again in the future. Do you have any parting words for the folks listening?
I always like to end with one little word of advice from America, and that's always to stay husky.
All right. Sounds good. So yeah, be sure to check out the Not So Little Italy podcast, and I will see the Pursuing Points fans tomorrow for our interview with the co-founder of 30k.com. Thank you so much.